Alright everyone, we have good news today, which is that Lauraloomer managed to fend off no less than 5 other people and almost got a full 50% actually in the GOP primary down for one of the Florida House races. That means she is now officially the Republican nominee, which is something she had forged ahead, and again, when you've got 5 other people in the race and you still managed to almost crack 50, that's a pretty good showing in a primary. She managed as well, despite the fact that she's been deplatformed on half of the visible internet. Like, she's not allowed to use Twitter. I think she got banned off PayPal, among other things. Despite that, she managed to raise more money, get more votes, and now she goes up against the incumbent who won her primary challenger was basically non-existent. I think Lois Frankel, who she's now facing off against, the Democrat, I think got over 80% because there's only one other person running. Long-term incumbents tend to have that advantage. She's got a shot at winning this, of potentially flipping this district. What I would say is if the political metrics continue to move in the direction at the particular speed they appear to be moving, with the Democrats slowly pissing away all of their support because they're embracing rioting, a high-tax platform, a no-guns policy, and stuff like that, if they continue to overreach, which is what they've done. They were handed a small mandate because Trump was relatively unpopular there. You got a pandemic. The response, while I don't consider it to be botched, was less popular over time. You have, unrest. The Democrats were handed an inch and they took a foot, which is exactly what I expected them to do, and that was months ago that I anticipated that. It's the opposite of what Republicans do. If that continues, if they continue to overstretch, pretend that the average middle American, the average small towner, the average suburbanite, the average independent voter, the swing state sort of apolitical crowd, if they continue to alienate these people, Loomer could very well win. Again, there's a reason why the Dem is the incumbent there. Incumbents have an advantage, but it's possible. And I hope that it does happen, but a bigger question that I have, now that she is an official candidate for Congress, now that she has been officially nominated by the Republicans in that sense. The voters of the Republican Party in that district have chosen her as their standard bearer. Is she going to be replatformed, or is Twitter going to continue conducting election interference? Because I would think that that's what it would boil down to. This is an individual. This isn't, some third-party candidate, although I don't believe that any candidate should be deplatformed from any service. It should be seen as illegal. No, it's not a private corporation. It platforms government figures and services, and for there to be any differential in that platforming, I think, is editorialization. It violates 230. It violates the spirit of the First Amendment. It violates the very philosophical underpinning of a free society with free communication in which people can actually debate and have political discussions. Is she going to be replatformed? I think that Twitter should be pressured to replatform her. Along with all the others. For a mainline candidate, again, someone who has been chosen by a significant proportion of the Republicans there as their candidate, regardless of what you think about her beliefs, why should she be deplatformed? Like, they're not going to ban Trump's account. Trump can say the N-word on Twitter and not get banned. They'd flip out. They would definitely post-block it and lock it down, but it wouldn't be gone. His account would still be there. Lauraloomer, at the end of the day, is not that far out of the mainstream of the Republican core. It's the idea that she's critical of Islam and that therefore there's this drastic, terrible thing, oh my God, she's a horrible bigot, dude. It's more mild than what liberals were saying about Islam in a general sense 10 years ago on the internet. They've all scrubbed their social media. You're not going to find more than a few trappings of how they really feel on the issue of organized religion, but it's definitely there. Her views on guns, okay, well, yeah, she's definitely further right on that, and I'm sure she is on censorship. Considering the fact that she herself has been deplatformed, we could end up with an odd scenario where she wins the election and she takes office. She becomes officially a House representative member, and she doesn't have a Twitter account because she's still banned. It sets up an interesting possible legal challenge, too. Would that not be an interference directly in the political structure of the United States by a for-profit entity, number one? And I don't know why liberals like that idea, because I think it's asinine to the max. And number two, potentially, is explicit interference by a company that's not supposed to editorialize at all, let alone, again, law-abiding conversation by an elected member of Congress. I think that it violates the rights of their constituents, too. Why should the constituents of Florida, you can contact the offices of many representatives and so forth on these platforms. You can contact the Facebook page. It's run by a staffer. Your message might manage to get through. You can get information about their platform. You can get all sorts of good stuff. Twitter has USGS and all that stuff as well. NOAA alerts, weather alerts that could save lives. The constituents of Lauraloomer, if she's elected, are being deprived of the possibility of using that platform, if that's the platform they prefer, to interact with the person that they've literally hired to go to DC and represent them in the most official capacity. That's what the House is about. It's supposed to be the closest to the people, more beholden to them. Originally, the Senate wasn't even elected directly like it is now originally. For the first incarnation, the Senate was chosen by the state legislatures, and it was sort of an extension of the House. At the state level, it was basically more Articles of Confederation style system that was in place for some time. It swiftly got changed because of popular demand, which I think was actually a mistake, to tell the truth. I think the Senate should have remained more distant and even had more decorum than it does now. It's meant to slow down the political process, not without good reason, specifically to prevent direct democracy. Lauraloomer remains, now candidate Loomer. She's no longer primarying against other Republicans with an arm tied behind her back and still massively outraising them and winning. Now she's candidate Loomer. She's the one who represents the Republican Party for that position in that district. Twitter needs to be pressured. All of these other sites, and there's probably a list somewhere, and I'm sure it's fairly long, of all the places that have deplatformed Loomer. She should be given equal protection under the law as a candidate by companies which have signed on to 230 in spirit, number one, and must conform to the idea of equal access. If a cake shop is not allowed to refuse to make a custom cake, even though they don't make custom cakes like this in general, for a gay couple, how can you possibly argue that a multi-billion-dollar tech monopoly can ban a person who's running for Congress and has the blessing of a mainline party? And I know there are a lot of Republicans that have distanced themselves from Loomer. It's like, oh my God, she's been labeled a bigot, somewhat wrongfully. We must disavow to save ourselves. Why? Now, criticism of organized religion is now a bad thing, according to the left. That's interesting. It's definitely a 180 from how they were in the 2000s. If you remember anything about their platforms, they strenuously avoided mentioning their Christianity back in the 90s and 2000s, generally speaking, or their other religious beliefs. It's considered a bad thing within the Democratic core. Now they love the Pope, sometimes, when he's talking about how condoms to prevent AIDS can be a good thing. When he talks about walls and bridges, they love the Pope. Then when he mentions that he generally opposes transgendered things, they flip out and they say, oh, well, the Catholic Church was modernizing. Now it's back in the 18th century. Never left it in the first place. And I think there's a possibility of her winning. I think it's considered a long shot race because you've got, again, Democrat incumbent, full blessing of the party, in her case, Loomer again. She's partially deplatformed. Therefore, she's not capable of fundraising in the same way all candidates do, or communicating as all candidates do. She doesn't have the full blessing of all members of the Republican Party. And yet there's still a chance that she becomes Congresswoman Loomer. That would be interesting because, of course, she came on Happy Homelands, and Ramsey Paul and myself, I think this was like 6 weeks ago, if I remember correctly, that episode. No, and we actually grilled her on her political positions. It would be interesting that would be a preface to her actually being in Congress. So we actually talked to a member who might be sitting, and this is an important district too. Florida's the most important state in election after election because it's always a squeaker. And this happens to be the district that also encompasses the Mar-a-Lago. So think about that synchronicity there, that occult mimetic connection, and how funny it would be. So yeah, I hope Loomer wins. If you're there in Florida, I hope you are voting for her. If you're there in her district, you should probably campaign for her because, again, she's not able to campaign on half a dozen different tech platforms, something that I find atrocious. I think that it should be illegal, to tell the truth. It should be illegal for a company that operates under 230 with the latitude against prosecution for copyright or illicit porn or something like that. These companies don't get in trouble for that because they agree not to editorialize. Because the whole idea is that they can't editorialize. It's impossible for them to actually do full moderation because they're too big. That's what 230 is about, allowing large tech firms to exist in the first place. Well, if you start editorializing to the point where you're banning potentially a sitting member of Congress, I would think that that explicitly breaches 230, and an investigation at the very least should commence by Congress. That's about all. Peace out.